Okay, I think everyone will get settled. This is fantastic to have such a beautiful crowd. This is great. This is just what we all envisioned. What we all for. It's a beautiful mixture of people throughout the community. This is perfect. We're going to have a great evening, and I'm so excited. We're going to have a great speaker, and I'm just going to talk. We're also going to have supply and chief in the middle. We're going to have a great panel discussion afterwards. Everyone in the audience will be able to ask the medical experts on exercise. On exercise. And so we're going to have a great evening. So I'd like to start out by thanking BIO5. BIO5 has made this event possible. BIO5 has funded this event in particular. I'd love to thank Jennifer Martin, who's the director of BIO5. She has her hands up. Everybody give her a hand. She's finally doing this. Thank you. That's great. Thank you for this. This is a symposia series of 7 different symposia. This is the second, and we have Herman Pontzer tonight, a New York Times star and front-page Scientific America. So we're really fortunate, and he'll get introduced in a second. I also want to thank the BIO5 staff, Tatiana, Kelly, and all the rest of them. You guys made this possible, and thank you. Thank the associate directors of BIO5, in particular Michael Herman. It's been together, we kind of envisioned this, and this is with the other associate directors. It's just been a wonderful event. It's only growing. Our next event will be May 3rd, so put that on your calendar, register for it. It'll be Randy East. He is an evolutionary medicine. He literally wrote the book. It is the book. It's the New York Times best-selling book called Evolutionary Medicine. So please attend that on May 3rd. So we're really excited about that. I'm going to start off with just trying to tell you what we're doing, and I realize that we have scientists and we have community here, and we realize that, and these events are designed for that. So we're going to speak to both audiences, but the idea here, and this is a very complicated slide, and I apologize for it to begin with, but the idea is up at the top: early environmental conditions, nutrition, climate, altitude, exercise, pathogens, UV, gave rise to adaptive conditions that created tremendous diversity in human populations. And that diversity that was created, that was genetic diversity, epigenetic diversity, microbiome diversity within and among populations. So one size fits all just simply is no longer appropriate. It's no longer appropriate for diet, exercise, lifestyle. Now that genetic variation interacts with contemporary lifestyles. And in particular, the modern Western diet or sedentary lifestyles, and again, okay, now I got, and again, that gives rise, that interacts with contemporary nutritional lifestyles. We have this evolutionary discordance. We're eating in a way that we weren't designed to eat. We're eating in a way in which our evolution did not design us to eat. That causes discordance, and with that discordance comes human disease. And again, what we see over here is one of the great things about the University of Arizona. And I've only been here 8 months from Wake Forest University in North Carolina. And the data science and computational approaches allow us to understand all this. And the wonderful anthropology folks allow us to understand all this. So this is what we call transdisciplinary. Now what that means is there's a bunch of folks coming from a bunch of different disciplines, and they each add their own input, and it allows us to make sense of it all. And that's the model. That's what we're trying to build here, and we think it is really beautiful. Right now, I'm going to introduce Dave Rapeland. Dave is in the School of Anthropology, and he was mentioned in that Scientific American article with Herman, and I'm going to allow him to introduce his good friend, Herman.
Well, great. Thanks so much, and thanks for coming out tonight. I think you all are in for a real treat. This is going to be a really informative talk. It's going to be really exciting, and Herman does some really creative work. So I think we're really lucky to have Herman Pontzer out here. Herman has become a real leader in our field, and I think, in a sense, he is transdisciplinary. All the stuff on that slide, Herman puts a lot of that together, and you're going to see that all come together in a really exciting way tonight. Herman got his bachelor's degree from Penn State, and then moved on to get his PhD from Harvard. That's where we met. I was a postdoc in the same lab that Herman was getting his PhD in, and we've been great friends, collaborators since then. His graduate work, he really started off with an interest in how energy expenditure and energetics influence human evolution. And as a grad student, he was interested in walking and running and how energetics played a role in the evolution of human locomotor systems. But as he moved on from graduate school and he took faculty positions at WashU, St. Louis, and Hunter College, and now at Duke University, as he moved on from that work, he started to think much broader, and he started to think about how energetics influence human evolution all the way up to today, and including how our metabolic physiology has evolved. His work's super creative, but he's going to show you all that tonight. One thing I do want to point out that I think is really exemplary about Herman's work is that he tries really hard to translate the science to the public sphere. So in addition to being covered by tons of news sources, New York Times, NPR, etc., he wrote an op-ed for the New York Times. He's written 2 pieces for Scientific American, and they're really wonderful reads. If you haven't seen it, there's January issue. He's got the cover story of Scientific American. And it's really a great place to get a primer on some of the things he's going to be talking about tonight. So I won't take up any more of your time. I just want to welcome Herman here tonight, and if you could join me in welcoming him.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, everyone, for coming. Thanks to BIO5, the Precision Wellness Seminar Series, for having me out here. Thanks for that lovely introduction. Oh, is it gonna? How about I do this? Is that better? Let's do that. I can move a little more anyway. So, I have to kind of check myself whenever I get a chance to speak to a group of folks or a seminar series that's involved or interested in public health and wellness. Because as Dave said, when I went to Harvard to study human evolution, I had no intention of helping anybody, ever. That was not on the cards. I just wanted to do evolutionary biology. But what happened as my interest grew and a lot of work I've done with Dave has advanced is what we found is that evolutionary perspective that you get studying human evolution carefully and rigorously in multiple ways sheds a really important light and shows us new things about how our bodies work, how they got to be the way they are today, and how we can keep them healthy and moving throughout our lives. That's some of the work I want to share with you today. Let's see if this is going to work like I think it is. Well, the advancer isn't, which, is it on? Oh, it has to be on. It is on. That's perfect. Just give me a cue and I will. Okay. All right, this is going to be old, so I'm going to be like, next slide. There's some animations in there, so let's see how that goes. Well, next slide, let's see how that goes. All right, so underneath that head of luscious hair is a young graduate student at Harvard University. That's me. And it's 2005, and this is how a lot of my interest in human evolution started out. It's some lab-based stuff, looking at locomotor mechanics, putting dogs and goats and humans on treadmills, which is a lot of fun. But in the summers, I would go out and dig at a site called Lineage, which is in the Republic of Georgia there on the map. And it was fun to get out of the lab and get my hands dirty and work on fossils. It was so much fun. And you know, if you look at that picture, you think, oh, that's a happy guy. And I am relatively happy, although I see tragedy in this picture. I'll tell you why. Go ahead and hit the next slide. It's because that skull was about a centimeter underneath the dirt you're looking at right there. But I didn't get to excavate that skull because I wasn't there the next day. So that's how that goes. That's okay. Anyhow, so these are some of we found, this is skull 5, so named because there's 4 other skulls. We found a lot of material at this site of Lineage. And, you know, again, the reason I was there was because I wanted to get my hands on the material record of our evolution, but also because Lineage, the site of Lineage, captured a really important time in the history of our species. Go ahead, next slide. Go ahead and begin. Hit a couple of them. There you go. We'll just do this. Yep. So if you look at the evolution of our species, right? Are we going to try to advance it? Maybe that'll happen. If you look, we split the human lineage, which is lots of branches coming off that tree. The human lineage in yellow split from the chimpanzees and bonobos about 7 million years ago, and for the first few million years, first sort of 5 million years actually, our ancestors are sort of bipedal apes, right? Walking around on 2 legs, but live in a very ape-like existence, eating plant-based diets. And then what happens is, at Lineage, which is right there at the base of where, the genus Homo there, I can do this. Are we gonna, okay. Perfect. All right, thanks for our technical difficulty. So I'm actually gonna back it up because I spent so much time on this animation. All right, so first 5 million years were just bipedal apes, and then at about 2 million years ago, we get the evolution of our genus, the genus Homo, and that's, as you can see, we get out of Africa for the first time and across the globe, and it's really exciting, not just because of the geographical expansion, but because of what it means. What it means, what it's telling us is, we're not any longer trapped to living in the forests. We're a species, we're a lineage that can live anywhere in the globe. We're ecologically flexible, we're smart, and we're weed species now. We're getting everywhere. The way we're doing that is we're changing the way we're getting our food. We're adapting a hunting and gathering lifestyle. So the genus Homo here, that starts around 2 million years ago, that gets out of Africa and spreads all over the globe, that's a hunting and gathering genus. Our genus is a hunting and gathering genus. And Lineage is so exciting because it captures that first expansion out of Africa. So it's such an exciting place to work because it was about 2 million years old. It was right at that first snapshot, those first few frames of the movie that becomes the genus Homo becomes us. Now, Homo sapiens, our species, is just the latest branch off of that genus Homo tree, right? So we get going around 300,000 years ago in Africa as well, expand, of course, all over the globe. The reason I show you this is I just want to make it evident how important hunting and gathering has been in our evolution, right? We are a hunting and gathering species. That comes from a hunting and gathering stock. We've been hunting and gathering since before we were us, right? And so this is an important thing. You need to understand this to understand anything about how the human body works today, because this is what shaped us, right? The hunting and gathering lifestyle is what shaped us, what we're built to do. And that has profound implications for how we live today and how we can stay healthy and how we understand human biology in the modern world. We've all as hunter-gatherers, things like cities and supermarkets and, urban spaces, these are all recent and really weird developments, only a few generations old. That's a blink of an eye evolutionarily. And so we have this interesting mismatch where our bodies are evolved to be hunting and gathering. The sort of zoos that we've built ourselves to live in today are very different than that hunting and gathering lifestyle. And so it raises the question, and this is my question, people have been asking this question now for a few decades, is modernization making us sick? Is this huge change from the way we were evolved to the way we live now making us sick? And so these are some of the gory details here, what people would call diseases of civilization, right? So rates of obesity and overweight, which are high and getting higher. Diabetes prevalence, which sort of mirror these obesity issues. Heart disease. Interestingly, heart disease starts to go down the last couple of decades as people stop smoking so much. But sadly, we're sort of rising up again. Probably again tied to increases in unhealthy weights. Cancer is on the rise. So we think a lot of this cardiometabolic disease, so cardiometabolic disease is this catch-all term for heart disease, diabetes, overweight, and obesity, because these are all interlinked, interrelated diseases. And they seem to be a function of this mismatch between our evolutionary roots as hunter-gatherers and the way we live today. The reason we think that is that if we look at hunting and gathering groups, they're incredibly healthy, okay? Hunter-gatherers are really healthy. They have really low rates of obesity. They have such low rates of type 2 diabetes that it's actually hard to get numbers on it. There's so few of them in any population you might go and study. Heart disease is some tiny fraction of the population. And I'll just point this out. Some people will say, well, of course, they never got heart disease. They never lived long enough to get it. That's not actually how it works. Hunter-gatherer populations, sort of non-industrialized populations do have low life expectancies, but that's because of all the childhood mortality that happens from infectious disease, right? They get pneumonia and don't have a hospital or antibiotics to turn to get better when they're kids. So a lot of children die in these populations. That brings the average way down, right? But if you survive B15, you'll probably live into your 50s, 60s, even 70s and 80s. Okay, so these are incredibly healthy populations. They aren't going to get sick from the things that we are most likely to die from. Wouldn't we like to know what the trick is, right? Why they're not going to get sick, why they don't get sick. And so this is a question that myself, Dave Reichman, who was up here a second ago, and others in my field have been asking, how have activity, energetics, and diet changed? How has lifestyle changed over the past couple of generations as we've modernized and industrialized that might be relating, it might be leading us to higher rates of all these non-communicable diseases? That's what I want to talk about today. And what I want to get at especially is not sort of taking a kind of cartoon view of what the past was like, but taking the approach that we might have taken, you know, with a fossil record. We can go out and actually dig on the fossils and get our hands on them, right? Let's go out and actually get into some of these populations, some of these hunter-gatherer populations, and ask these questions scientifically. Not just cast our minds back in news about what life used to be like, but actually ask these questions with some rigor and some data and some modern methods. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today. What does a hunting and gathering lifestyle really look like? Because there's lots of ideas out there about what paleo means. And right, who here is on a paleo diet today? Right? Basically, you know, so nobody's, well, one person was brave enough to raise their hand. Okay, 2 people are brave enough. Yeah. Right, so, you know, does a paleo diet mean a ketogenic diet? These kind of questions, right? We can ask these questions with some detail and rigor if we actually go out and work with these populations to ask these questions. Okay. So I'm going to talk about a couple different populations. I'm going to start off with this group called the Hadza. And they're a great place to start because they're very representative in many ways of what we think the kind of median, the sort of average hunter-gatherer population would have been like over much of the last few 100,000 years. I want to start with a couple of caveats. Caveat 1 is all human populations a few generations ago, well, over 10,000 years ago anyhow, doesn't seem like too long to me because I've worked in millions of years, but anyway. All human populations were hunting and gathering, and there would have been a huge amount of diversity in what hunting and gathering looked like. And so if I show you 1 or 5 or 10 human populations of hunt and gather, I still am not showing you the full breadth of what humans are capable of and what they did. Right? So we have to understand that these are case studies. These aren't the full breadth of human experience. And the second thing I'll mention just as we get going, people often ask this, when we go and work with a population like the Hadza, you know, do we worry about, you know, sort of messing up their culture by showing up with Land Rovers and laptops and computers and that kind of stuff? And the answer is the populations that we work with, like the Hadza, the way to think about it is they're sort of like the Amish. I grew up in Pennsylvania, so everything's like the Amish. They're kind of like the Amish populations out east. They know about the outside world. They interact with people, researchers occasionally, other tribes in that area every day. And so they're not naive to the outside world. They just are really proud of their traditions, and they want to keep their old cultural ways. And so we don't have to worry too much about changing their culture by showing up there, because they know about the outside world, but they prefer to keep to their own traditions, which is, of course, invaluable from our perspective, because even though no one population can tell us about all of human history, it's populations like this that give us a window into what it would have been like if we had grown up as hunter-gatherers, right? What would it be like if you'd grown up as a hunter-gatherer? We can ask that question to a population like the Hadza. Okay, so with that preface, let's talk about them. The Hadza are hunter-gatherers. I've been using that word a lot. What that means is they don't have any crops, no farming, no machines, no guns, no electricity, no lights, nothing like that. Instead, every day, they wake up with the sun, and they go and get the food that they're going to eat that day from the wild landscape around them, from the wild plants and animals that are in their landscape. And we're lucky that we still have enough intact ecosystem in East Africa protected that they're able to make a living this way. They live in northern Tanzania, near Lake Eyasi, south of Ngorongoro Crater. If you've ever had a chance to get to that part of the world, it's beautiful, you should go. And the work I'm going to talk about here with the Hadza was done with Dave Reichman, who kindly introduced me, and Brian Wood, who's at UCLA now, both of whom none of this work would have been possible without Brian and Dave's help, so I want to make sure we acknowledge that. All right, so what I want to start off with is, what's a day in the life of a Hadza look like? Right? What does their lifestyle look like? If we want to understand how lifestyles today differ, let's understand, first of all, what a hunting and gathering lifestyle looks like. So, surprise, surprise, they're very, very active, all right? They get up in the morning, and women will go off in groups to forage for plant foods. They get a lot of steps. They go about 8 kilometers a day, often with a kid on their back, right? This is a group of women out foraging near a camp called Sengeli. They get about 8 kilometers of walking in. That's about 13,000 steps if you've got your step counter, right? That's every day. That's an average for about every day. And again, it's not just a walk-in. They're also collecting berries or digging tubers. This is a kind of the classic Hadza woman's workday. Kid on your back, asleep, right? Kids can sleep anywhere. Kids are kids of the world around. And you've got your classic Hadza woman digging stick, and you're digging in really rocky, tough ground to get wild tubers out. So tubers, these wild root vegetables, are a really important part of their diet. It's sort of the foundation of their diet are these starchy root vegetables, the undomesticated relatives of the potatoes and yams in your supermarket. The men go off by themselves. They hunt with bow and arrow that they make themselves. They have there's a couple of desert rose bushes that they will boil, that they'll cut up into pieces, boil down, and get the sap into a paste, and then put the paste around the tip of the arrows. The paste of some of the sap is a poison that makes the blood clot in the animals that they shoot. So the bows are very powerful. Every time they pull back a bow, it's the same as doing a one-arm pull-up, right? These guys are tough. But those arrows are also, because they're poison, they can take down giraffe, they can take down zebra, right? We've seen that when we've been in camps with them. These are really amazing, tough, excellent hunters. They go off by themselves because their approach is to stalk prey, and so they feel like they'll get a better chance of doing that. They'll be more effective if they go by themselves. And they walk further because there's less there are fewer animal calories on a landscape than there are plant calories, right? So it's a normal thing in ecology that carnivores always walk further than herbivores, and in human societies where you divide up the labor like that, men who hunt go further than who gather. So 19,000 steps a day on average. So that all probably fits with what your expectations are of hunting and gathering so far. No big surprises yet. But if we talk more about how they get their food and how they get their calories, this might surprise you. You see here is a Hadza man and his buddy out for a walk, and you see these big baobab trees here, and you see how it's scarred up on the surface. That's because when men feel like either they want to change the pace, or maybe they feel like they're not having any luck hunting that day, they will climb these trees to extract honey. So it's a big part of their diet, actually. So you can see he's cut a little sapling into several pegs there. The bark of these baobab trees is like cork. It's very soft. And you can, with your axe, you make a little hole, and then you pound the peg in, and you hope it doesn't fall out as you stand up on it. Incredibly dangerous. Every Hadza man I've talked to has had some story about falling out of a baobab tree. And, you know, some of the people occasionally die this way, often get hurt, but it's a part of Hadza life. I want you to notice the size of this bucket, okay? He's not, you know, that's not like the Ford F-150 truck of Hadza. He's not overcompensating for anything. He's actually going to fill that bucket with honey, okay? And he'll eat as much as he can right there in the tree, and he'll fill that bucket up, and he'll take it back to camp, and they'll all share it. They eat an incredible amount of honey. Honey, by the way, it has the same sugar breakdown as high fructose corn syrup, in case you're wondering. Their honey does too, we checked. And honey makes up about 15 to 20% of the Hadza diet, of all the calories they eat, 15 to 20%. And that's sometimes it's higher, sometimes it's lower. That's a year average of calories going into their bodies, how they survive. I once was out walking with a husband and wife team with their kids, and they let me follow along for the day, which was fun. And it was one of the first times I was ever out in a Hadza camp. They ate so much honey, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It's more honey than I ever eat a year, you know, in the day. They consume. It's a lot of honey. They share all their food, right? Of course, they might have a nibble out with their foraging, but everything, they pretty much bring it all back. All the meat comes back, all the honey comes back, all the plant foods come back, and they share. And sharing is actually what makes hunting and gathering tick, right? It's not hunting or gathering. It's hunting and gathering. Right, so the fact that we're all sitting here sharing some food, this is a very hunter-gatherer moment we're all having. I hope you can appreciate that, right? And you know, this lifestyle, the way that we get our calories, hasn't just affected the way our bodies work. It's affected the way our lives work and our lives function. If this was a group of chimpanzees, right, they'd have to come in with mops to clean up the blood in about 5 minutes, right? And rip each other's heads off. Don't do that. But because we're humans and we're nice and we share, we can all get along and have a nice day like this. So sharing is a really important part of the culture, and it's an important part of thinking about how they get their calories in every day. Another thing I'd point out, this woman, Mile, on the left, she's in her 70s. I don't know how old she is in that picture exactly, but she's probably 75, 76 in that picture. She goes out and forages with the younger ladies every day. She keeps up. We have data on this now. They're going just as far, just as fast as their younger counterparts. So these are amazing examples of how to age well and age with vigor in these kind of populations. Okay, so I just wanted to give you kind of a visual snapshot of what life is like. And we're going to transition to talk a lot of numbers now. So there'll be some nice pictures, but I just wanted to give you a snapshot before we start talking data. As you might imagine, right, with that much physical activity, if we compare how many minutes of what people in public health call moderate and vigorous physical activity, which is what it sounds like, activity where you're really out going for it, how many minutes do you rack up a day? How many minutes do you think you racked up a day of moderate and vigorous physical activity? If you run up the stairs, you might get half a minute, right? If you went to the gym, which I hope you did, or went out and run outside, you get some, okay? But typically, people don't get too much in the US and in Europe. The Hadza get about 120 minutes, 2 hours a day of moderate and vigorous physical activity, which is an order of magnitude more than you or I get. Okay? So the way to think about this is they get more activity in a day than you get in a week. Okay? This is data that Dave Reichen put together, by the way, I should mention. They don't get sick. So this fits with all the other data on hunter-gatherers that we've seen before. They don't get heart disease. If you look at blood pressures, Hadza men and women are very, very low. Occasionally you see someone with high blood pressure, but very little, very, very rare. And usually they just cross the threshold for high blood pressure. They're not sky high. Whereas, you know, about 65% of folks in their 60s and older in the US have high blood pressure. And not surprisingly, their body mass index, their sort of general measure of obesity and overweight, they're not anywhere near either of those cutoffs. So very physically active, excellent cardiovascular health, No sign of diabetes. We checked. They don't have their resting glucose, their fasting glucose levels are very good. They're also not ketogenic, by the way, which we can get back to if people are interested. But very good body mass index, very good heart health. And so one of the first things we went to do when we put the study together, Dave and Brian and I, was to ask what seems like a really obvious and simple question, which is all of the really excellent health that they get out of their lifestyle, is it because they're burning lots of calories? Right? If you go onto the WHO or CDC websites right now, or ask anyone in public health, why are people getting overweight? Right? Why is cardiovascular disease so bad? One of the answers you'll often get is, well, it's because we don't burn as many calories as we used to. We used to be a lot more active, right? In the hunting and gathering days, we'd be a lot more active. We used to burn a lot more calories, and we burn off all those extra calories, and so we wouldn't accumulate as fat. And that's why we get sick today we don't before. We didn't in the past. Well, it turns out nobody actually had measured how many calories you burn as a hunter gatherer. When I found that out, I was like, Dave, guess what we're going to do? Right? We're going to go and measure energy expenditures with hunter gatherers. This seems like a pretty obvious thing to do, and we were sure we'd get really high expenditures, but we thought we should do the work anyway. And so we went out to test the hypothesis that hunter gatherers burn more calories than you and I do. And we did it using a technique, and I won't talk about methods too much, but it's a technique called the doubly labeled water method, which is the gold standard measurement technique in public health. It's not an estimation of how many calories you burn. It's actually a measurement of how much carbon dioxide your body produces. So it's completely safe, and we use it in the US and the UK and elsewhere and around the world all the time. But it basically uses isotopes to track how much carbon dioxide your body produces every day. And you can't make CO2 without burning calories. You can't burn calories without making CO2. So it's a really precise, solid way to measure calories a day. And we thought we'd use that gold standard measurement to get the first ever measurements of hunter-gatherer energy expenditures that anybody's ever gotten. Okay. But I wanted to, before I show you the data, I want you to think about what that data should look like, right? Think about how many calories everybody in this room is burning. Big people probably burn more calories than small people, so we have to account for body size effects, right? But if we look at how body size and energy expenditure relate to each other, we see such a positive relationship. And we should see the Hadza are way up above all the other non-Hadza populations we have in here, because we have lots of industrialized populations compared to. So that's what we were expecting. The Hadza to jump off and be a completely separate group away from industrialized populations. Here's what we actually found. Okay, so to walk you through this graph, every dot's a person. This is calories a day. We have it on a log scale. I apologize, but this is the average here is about 2,500 calories a day. Every dot's a person. Open dots are women. Closed dots are men. Red dots are Hadza. And we have this against body size, fat-free mass, actually, your lean mass. And a few things to notice. First of all, there's a lot of variability, right? In this room, even after I account for body size differences, I'm still going to see a lot of variability. Some people really do have high metabolisms. Some people really do have slow metabolisms. That's a real thing. Okay? How many people have slow metabolisms? Go ahead, raise them up. Go ahead, don't be shy. How many have fast metabolisms? Wow, okay. People are either more proud to have fast metabolisms or more likely to come to this talk for fast metabolisms. All right. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. But the Hadza, actually we have 46 individuals now, men and women, are right in that same cluster of results as folks from industrialized populations. So what we can say is there is no difference. The Hadza are 10 times more active than you, but they burn the same number of calories every day. How in the world is that possible? Right? That was a very strange result, and has kind of kicked off what has been a few years now of following up on this work with other populations and other studies, which we'll dive into a little bit deeper. The first thing I figured when we saw this data was that we were wrong, right? That we screwed up. That's what that's what you should always think as a scientist when you get the results that you really don't expect or don't make sense. You have to assume that you screwed up. And so we got more data. It looked the same. We used a new technique, a different technique based on heart rates, so we could measure heart rates over the course of a week. and we could calibrate individual people's heart rates against a mask-based measurement of calories burned. So each person had a calibrated heart rate measurement for a week, and they gave us the same numbers. So in white is that heart rate-based number, and in red is the doubly labeled water-based number, TE instead of DE, that's okay. Total energy expenditures are the same for men and women as we got with the doubly labeled water technique. So it wasn't a techniques issue. Okay. What the heck's going on? Maybe the HODs are weird. Okay. Maybe, I don't know, right? So we spent the last 2 years trying to find other populations to do this with. Now that's not easy to do because not a lot of populations are still hunting and gathering. We found a couple. The first I'll tell you about is the population called the Shuar. Very different ecology. These are, tropical rainforest populations. They live in the Amazon rainforest of Ecuador, and not just sort of ecologically, geographically distinct, but also if you were to make a map of the human family tree, they would be about as far away from the HODs as any other population could be. Okay, so also you got a lot of diversity in terms of genetics here as well. This is work done by my postdoc Sam Erlacher, who's amazing and is going to take a job at Baylor next year. And he was curious about energy expenditure and these kind of questions, but specifically he wanted to know what the picture looked like for kids. And so these guys are hunter-gatherers. They also do a little bit of farming, but very similar in lifestyle to the HODs, a very active lifestyle, living off of the land. And so he did the same kind of same kind of study as I did with the HODs, but with the Shuar and with kids. And just to show you just like you'd expect, Shuar kids are way more active. This is accelerometry based. So you put a little step counter on babies. It's more complicated than that, but it's basically a step counter to figure out how much they move each day. And depending on if you do this moderate, vigorous physical activity or just total activity a day, way more active than an industrialized sample. So way more physically active. Sam was also able to do something we couldn't do with the HODs, which is to get a really good basal metabolic rate measurement. So basal metabolic rate is the energy you burn when you're almost asleep. In the morning, totally rested, you're not digesting food, you're not cold, you're not warm, you're not stressed out, you're just laying there, totally relaxed. That's your basal metabolic rate. We think of that as kind of like the background amount of energy you have to spend just to keep yourself alive. The Shuar kids have a really high basal metabolic rate compared to the US and UK controls. So here is the Shuar in red, and here's their average if you just want to find their average over here. By the way, I apologize, these are all in log space. They have to be, because the relationship between body size and energy expenditure isn't a straight line. It's actually like a curved kind of diminishing returns kind of plot. So you have to make them straight lines and do the stats on them. I'll talk about that later if you're interested. Anyway, the Shuar have much higher basal metabolic rates. And the reason for it is they're fighting infections like crazy. Right? As you can imagine, in a world without antibacterial soap and without indoor plumbing, without antibiotics, and in the muck of the Amazonian rainforest, you are getting hit constantly with parasites and bacteria and viruses. And so if we look at this measurement of how active their immune systems are, this is a circulating immunoglobulin, it's a cytokine, it's in your blood, it's a molecule that tells us how active your immune system is. The kids that had much more active immune systems had much higher basal metabolic rate elevations compared to the US and UK samples. Okay? So they have high basal metabolic rates. Their bodies are working hard even when they're at rest, and that's because they're constantly battling infection. Okay, so these guys have really high resting rates of energy expenditure. They have really high activity energy expenditures. They must have higher daily energy expenditures. Total energy expenditures over the course of the whole day. Right? Nope. Same as the HODs story. They burn as many calories over the course of a day as kids in the US and the UK. What the heck's going on? Maybe the Shuar are weird. Okay. So we looked at the Chimani, which are in a similar ecology, but actually are culturally a very different group. This is work done with Mike Gerber and Hill Kaplan. And similar kind of ecology, though, fishing, hunting and gathering, and a little bit of farming. And I'm going to show you the data slightly differently here. Rather than showing you these plots against body size, I'm going to take body size out of it and just give you an average, a size-adjusted average for these values. Here's the Hadza and the Chimani. This is physical activity measured with like a set counter or something like that. And look, they're way more physically active, men and women, than any of these other populations in gray. But total daily energy expenditure, the number of calories burned every day, is not different. Okay? And not only that, even if you think, well, okay, but Pontzer's lab might be weird, right? Scientists always have to wonder where the air is coming from, right? So maybe it's my whole lab. Maybe my whole lab is weird. I don't know. Possible. Look at these. These are data that were collected by other labs. And if we put them in these other populations in order of how active they are, there's no correspondence between that and how many calories they burn. This is a ratio of total energy expenditure to basal metabolic rate, which is another way of size correcting for daily energy expenditure. Same story. You don't have a higher what's called a PAL ratio, physical activity level ratio, compared to the PAL ratio doesn't correspond to physical activity. So the bottom line here is that physically active populations do not spend more energy every day. Wow. Okay, that's a real surprise. And what's cool about that is there's a couple things. One is this. If we want to imagine what life was like, what physiology was like for our hunter-gatherer ancestors, they probably weren't burning a lot more calories than we are today, right? Life in the past probably burned as many calories every day as life does today. That's not what's changed. When we wonder about how we got here in our environment today with a lot of cardiometabolic disease, that change isn't brought about by a big change in the number of calories we spend. We're not spending fewer calories today than we used to. We must be spending our calories differently then. And that's where the science gets really interesting. The other thing I'd point out is we got to this point, we discovered this new thing about how human physiology works from doing anthropology, from going out into the field and working with these populations. It wasn't a biomedical lab, although that's important too. But these other ways of understanding humans and how humans work are also contributing a lot to the way that we understand how our bodies work today. Just point that out. Okay, so what the heck's going on? Here's what I think's going on, and I want to shift gears right now and just talk a little bit about how I think this works. The way that you think about daily energy expenditure, and I'm assuming that because it's the way I was taught it, probably the way that you were taught it too, is that if we think about how physically active someone is, and how many calories you spend every day, that there's some amount of energy you spend on all the kind of background tasks. But as I get more and more active, I'm going to burn more and more calories because the physical activity energy expenditure is going to go up, up, up. And so the top line number here, the daily energy expenditure, is just going to go up correspondingly with physical activity. I don't think that's what's going on. Instead, what I think is going on is something like this. That as we get more physically active, our bodies work to keep total energy expenditure constrained within a pretty narrow window. There might be some wiggle room, but not much. Our bodies try to work to keep daily energy expenditure the same, even if we're really active or really inactive. So there's some set point that's set by evolution in the way we brought up. These are interesting questions that we're going to work on next few years. And that ratio might tell us about lifestyle, but the top number here of calories a day doesn't tell us about how active we are. Instead, energy expenditure is constrained. And so here's work I've done, just looking at other species here. This isn't just a human thing, this is other species. I know you can't read the x-axis, that's okay. The horizontal axis is always activity, the y-axis is always energy expenditure, and the black lines are total energy expenditure. And you can see in humans, in birds, and rodents, the more active you are, doesn't mean that you're going to burn more calories. Energy expenditure doesn't go up correspondingly. These are lab studies where you make an animal work harder and harder for its food. This is data that came out after I put that review together from Kevin Hall's group in the National Institutes of Health. They have mice, right? For a week, the mice don't have any access to a wheel, and so they measure their energy expenditure at baseline. Then they give them access to a wheel, and their wheel running goes up, 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 25,000 wheel turns a day. And their energy expenditure, flat line. A little bit of adjustment, and then flat line. No correspondence between expenditure and activity. Here's my favorite data, maybe because it came out of my lab. One of the things we figured out by doing comparative work, looking at humans and other primates too, talk about the other primate work today, but I'm happy to talk about it afterwards. If you look at other non-human primates, monkeys and apes and lemurs and lorises, they're all low metabolic rate animals. We're a low metabolic rate group, the primates compared to other mammals in gray here. But don't pay attention to that. Pay attention to this. If we look at captive, like zoo and lab, or wild populations of primates, they have the same energy expenditures. An animal in the zoo burns as many calories as an animal in the wild, right? Crazy. Okay. So what's going on? How does it adapt? Well, here's a nice kind of way to look at this. If we look at this is a study where women and men were trained to run a half marathon. And so every few weeks, they did this over the course of the year. Well, my axis has gotten screwed up, I'm sorry. But every few weeks, they increased how much they were running to go from 20 to 40 to 60 minutes a day, 4 times a week. And this is over the course of the year. And when they first started doing this, from baseline, their energy expenditure went up. And so because it went up this much in the first increment, we can expect it to keep on going up like this as they keep on training and training and training. Instead, what happens is this. This is actual measurement of energy expenditure of people who train to run a half marathon. By the end, their energy expenditure is basically the same as when they started. Even though at this, after a year running now, they could run a half marathon. Here they can't. Here they're running 20 miles a week. Here they're not. Same energy expenditure. Basal metabolic rate isn't changing very much. Instead, there's something that's getting squeezed out, right? Activity isn't getting free. The running still costs energy, but the energy that's being spent on running is squeezing out other activity. This is kind of an exciting area of research I want to talk about quickly, and then we'll talk about diet, and we'll be done. As activity goes up, other expenditure goes down. You can think about it like this, right? So as activity goes up, the activity expenditure increases, but we're cutting out the other stuff. What we should expect is that evolution should be smart, and it should tune your body, it should tune your response, so that the stuff you cut out first is the stuff you don't really need to do anything. The luxury should be cut out first. The essentials should be spared. Right? This is what a constrained energy expenditure model predicts for us. And this is an area of research that we're just begun to get going. And so I'm going to share with you some preliminary literature review kind of data on this. And this is, again, it's an active area of research. I don't have much new data to show you, but I'll show you some stuff that's been published from old studies that seem to suggest this idea might not be so crazy. If we look at the immune system, okay? So as the immune system is responding, obviously, to bacteria and viral and parasitic threats, one of the things your immune system does in response to these threats is inflammation. Right, so inflammation is a normal immune response. It's a necessary immune response. But in the West, we have really high levels of chronic inflammation all the time, and that's not good. It leads to autoimmune disease, it leads to cardiometabolic disease, heart disease. And you can think about high levels of inflammation as being an overactive immune system. An immune system that has too much time and too many calories on its hands. As we get more and more physically active, right, we should cut out that inflammation, and that might be one of the reasons that exercise is so healthy. And if we look at the literature, of course, that's exactly what we see. As people go from low, medium, to high amounts of exercise in their lives, this is Haynes data for people who are interested, from 0 to 3 times of exercise a month, 4 to 20 exercise bouts a month, 22 plus a month. Their CRP levels, this is one of the things your doctor might measure to get your inflammation levels, goes down, down, down. Okay. Now, that's a good thing. So as we exercise more, we have less inflammation. That's one of the reasons exercise is so good for us, and it only makes sense in a kind of constrained energy expenditure model. Of course, if we take it too far, we can begin to cut out essential immune function. And that happens too. So if we look at moderate amounts of exercise, we can decrease chronic disease, decrease inflammation. If we go too far, we get what's called overtraining syndrome, right? Overtraining syndrome isn't a rare, isn't its own sort of unique pathology. It's the continuum, it's the end of the spectrum of more and more energy spent on activity. Okay. Same thing for stress response. So here's cortisol and norepinephrine reactivity, the hypothalamic pituitary axis, basically your fight or flight response to stress. Okay. If you take people who are trained, who run a lot, exercise a lot, and people who are not trained, and you stress them by doing this, by having to speak to a crowd, right? This is actually one thing they do. I don't know if they go to all this trouble, but they have you speak to people. It's called the true social stress test. Your heart rate, your cortisol levels, they jump right up, right? Because I think you guys might try to kill me. Even if I don't really think that, my body thinks that, right? But if I'm trained, it doesn't go up as high. If I'm untrained, it goes up quite high. right? And that's an energy cost. To have your heart rate jump up like that, to have your cortisol levels go up like that, that's an energy cost, right? Chronic exercise tamps down the energy cost of these responses. Reproductive, I could go on, I'll do one more. Reproductive system. As we get more and more active, we know that that affects levels of reproductive hormones. And so this is salivary testosterone. I could show you the same thing for women for progesterone. If we go from really inactive, sedentary populations like the USA to populations like the Hadza, right? Here we have Hadza testosterone levels. Those guys are incredibly physically active. They're lean. It's a, you know, you would think, perhaps, I might have thought, oh, they'll have really high testosterone levels. They're out there really going for it. No. A Hadza man has half the circulating testosterone levels of the men in this room. Okay? Because their body is tamping down reproductive investment to make room for all the activity that they have. And of course, just like immune function, if we take that too far, we can get aspects of this overtraining syndrome that affect the reproductive system. So female athletes will stop cycling. Men will have lower sperm counts, or men and women will both report lower libidos. Okay, and that's just the end of the spectrum of the response to exercise. Okay, this isn't a pathology. This is the end of. We don't have to think about it as its own unique thing. It's just what happens if you take this too far, exercise too far. Okay. So then the question becomes, right? How much is enough? How much is too much? Right? If we're going to sort of precisely, I like the way that Dr. Chilton led this. You know, how are we going to find out what's good for you? What's the right thing for you? How are we going to make these predictions about how to live a healthy life precise and tailored? This is the kind of question we should be asking. How much exercise is enough? How much is too much? Well, in terms of how much is enough, here's where I think we can go back to hunting and gathering groups, right? Presumably, this happy range here where we're very healthy is the range of activity that we're evolved to need. And I use the word need because I think our bodies actually do need that level of activity to be healthy, right? So we're evolved to require exercise for healthy, normal function. And I think that's a pretty wide range of you know, it isn't just one narrow target of activity that we're aiming for. There's a pretty wide window here, but hunter-gatherer groups, I think, tell us what that window would look like. Maybe, let's say, 10 to 20,000 steps a day, just to put some numbers out there. Would be something good to aim for. But again, something that we would like to know more about. What about how much is too much? Well, yeah, so the answer would be just do it, right? Don't worry about how you're getting your exercise. Don't worry about if it's high-impact interval training or if it's walking or your walking club. Just get out there and do it. Rack up the exercise. Get the minutes in, right? Try to get your 120 minutes a day. It's going to be hard, but go for that. Just get out there and do it, okay? How do you know if you've gone too far? Well, I think, you know, libido is a pretty good thing. If you have nothing else, no other indicator. You know, I mean, is it, if you're using the mic, if you don't feel like it anymore, then maybe you should stop. All right? So I think the just do it thing works in all kinds of ways. You know, the one thing I know about all of our ancestors, the ancestors of everyone in this room, is that they had sex. I'm sure of it. I'm not sure of anything else, but I'm sure of that our ancestors had sex. So I think the fact that libido is one of the first things, you know, we have these reproductive issues at the really high ends of activity levels, means that that's not what we're adapted to do. Because that's not an evolutionarily good strategy, is to shut down your reproductive system. So anyway, we want to try to think about how we want to titrate our activity levels or what we want to target. I think those are some ideas about how we might go about that. One thing about how fast the body adjusts, I don't want to leave you with the impression that if you go out and run a marathon tomorrow, your energy expenditure will be the same as it is today. That's not the kind of adjustment that we're talking about here. You're still going to have day-to-day fluctuations in energy expenditure, big days and small days. What the body seems to be trying to get within a narrow window is your sort of week average of energy expenditure, your weekly average. And your weekly average doesn't adjust right away. So if we look at people who use just exercise only for weight loss, there's a lot of studies like that. We can use those as one way of trying to figure out how fast the body adjusts to that new level of exercise. And the answer is, you know, people seem to adjust. So it's all over the map when you first start off, and we're kind of measuring how well you've adjusted by how much weight you've lost. If you lose extra weight, you're up here. If you gain weight, you poor thing, you're down here on an exercise program, you've gained weight, that's not good. But it's all over the map for the first, you know, few months. But by about 3 to 5 months, it settles out, and people have adjusted. And this is why exercise, one of the reasons exercise programs don't work really well for weight loss, is your body adjusts. Right? So the long-term expectation for an exercise-based program of weight loss is 0 weight loss. Right? If we go out far enough here, your expectation runs to 0. But that's not. But you should still exercise because of all the really good things it does for you. But don't expect it to change your weight. And this also tells us that, you know, whatever you are experiencing in the gym with your new routine for the first few months could be anything. Your adjustment's going to be personalized to you. But we can expect that as you adjust that new cycle, that new regime over a few months, your body's going to settle out with a metabolic rate near where it was before you started. Okay. So just to kind of, I was so jealous of Dr. Chilton's flow chart, I wanted to have my own. You know, this is the way I learned about obesity and overweight when I was coming up through undergrad. It's probably the way that you think about it too. And I want to just, again, push you to rethink this based on the evidence we have now. You used to think that, well, if you're more physically active, you burn more calories. You burn more calories, you change your body weight. Okay? I think what we can say now pretty solidly is that physical activity doesn't change our daily energy expenditure. It changes how we spend our calories, and that's just as important. This is why exercise is so critically important for your health and why we need it, because it actually changes the way our bodies work. And it's going to affect things like our heart health and how well we age and diabetes. We can't expect it to change body weight and obesity very well because that link doesn't work. And not only does the physical activity DEE relationship not work, this relationship is questionable. You know, what if we could raise our metabolic rate some other way? You know, crank up the air conditioning and live in a colder environment, right? I've heard, the last one I heard is drink ice water, because your body has to warm up the ice water and you burn more calories. What if we could burn, forget about exercise, what if we could find some other way to burn more calories? Does burning, who are my high metabolic rate people? Raise your hands again. We don't actually know if you have high metabolic rates, but let's assume you're right. Are you guys protected from weight gain? No. Burning more calories is actually not a protection against gaining weight. And that's because our bodies are incredibly good at matching our intake to our expenditure and matching our expenditure to our intake. It's a two-way street. Our bodies are incredibly good at this. So if you've been frustrated at trying to count calories as a way to know, to predict weight change, good luck. If you actually do reduce your calorie intake, your body's going to adjust and burn more fewer calories. If you eat more, your body adjusts. Here's how we know this. This is activity energy expenditure against weight change in a few hundred adult women. It should be a strongly negative relationship, right? If burning more calories makes you lose weight, it should be really strongly negative. Instead, it's nothing. If anything, it's positive. Here's in kids, residual daily energy expenditure. So if we take the effective body size away, are you a high metabolic rate person or a low metabolic rate person? We can do this with kids with real measurements of energy expenditure. That has no predictor of if the kid's going to gain body fat in the next couple of years. Okay? Your body matches expenditure to intake extremely well. And so trying to push your metabolic rate around is not going to be effective. There's no effective energy expenditure on weight or body fat change, and that's because your metabolism doesn't dictate weight change. Your metabolism responds to weight change. Our metabolisms are adaptive. They adapt to new exercise activity regimes. They adapt to changes in our diet. They adapt really well. Okay. So just in the last couple minutes here, that leaves the question of what about diet, right? Obviously, if the energy out part isn't going to be changed by activity or anything like that, what about the energy in? What do hunter-gatherers have to tell us about that? Well, that's a whole other talk, but I'll do some of the highlights. First of all, there is no one human diet. There's no one hunter-gatherer diet. This is 260 populations across the globe. This is where they live in terms of how far they are from the equator, so at the equator versus at the poles. And every dot here is a population, and every dot here is also here. This is how much they get from plants, plant foods, so carbs basically, and how much they get from animals, so fats. Okay? There's an enormous amount of variation. Yes, if you live in the Arctic where there are no plants, guess what? You don't eat plants. You're right about that. But we didn't come from the Arctic. The Arctic adapted populations are only 10,000 years old. They're almost as recent as farming. Most of our ancestors came from populations like this. And so, you know, the average is not the message here. The variability is the message. Humans can be healthy on almost any mix of plant and animal foods. And for that matter, we tend to have really high carbohydrate foods. I'm not going to get into the details of FQs, but, you know, pods that eat 15 to 20% of their calories as honey, lots of starchy tubers. A lot of these populations that are incredibly healthy, like the Chimani and the Shuar and the Hadza, have really high carbohydrate diets. So if you eat a ketogenic diet and it works for you, great, fantastic, don't change a thing. But it's not true that all paleo diets were low carb, or that that's the only way to be paleo, or even that that's necessarily an accurate way to think about most paleo diets. Most paleo diets are not low carb, most are pretty high carb as far as we can tell. We've had keto strips out to check if any of the Hadza folks work with a ketogenic. No, we've never seen a ketogenic Hadza person. Maybe we've missed them, maybe they're hiding somewhere, but we've never seen it. One thing we can say about those diets, hunter-gatherer diets, is they seem to be not as energy dense, not as many calories per mouthful. This is the Hadza, other small scale groups. This is calories per gram. This is calories per bite, basically. And here's Western diets for lean and obese folks. Yeah, and this is U.S. restaurant food, U.S. fast food. There's about a 30% difference here between some of our Western diets, especially the stuff that's built to be delicious. I think that's what's dangerous. Processed foods are built to be irresistible, right? That's a signal that is dangerous. We don't get full on them. And so it could be that there's an energy density issue with diets and with processed foods specifically that are literally engineered to make you overeat. So Hadza diets are probably less energy dense. Modern diets are probably more energy dense. They get a lot more fiber than we do. That's another thing we can aim for in terms of diet. If you're wondering how to change your diet to be more sort of reflective of our evolutionary past. Okay. So just to sum up quickly, exercise is critically important for health. It protects from disease and improves your aging, but it's not going to change your energy expenditure. That's okay, because energy expenditure doesn't change your weight anyway, right? It's going to change the way that your body burns calories, not the number of calories you burn. And that's why one of the reasons exercise is so critically important. Obesity is more about diet than exercise, right? That's an implication of this idea that the energy we expend is kind of fixed and hard to budge. Well, then when we get it wrong, our energy balance get it wrong, it's because we're eating too much. And so it's not our fault. I'm not blaming anybody, but we should begin to look at what aspects of our diet we might be able to change to reduce overeating and taking in more calories than we burn. And we have to think about diet and exercise as two different tools, two different jobs. The reason this Hadza kid's going to grow up extraordinarily healthy, if he can avoid the infectious disease, is not because of his diet or his exercise, but because he's got two tools, and they're both really important. Diet and exercise are both going to support his cardiovascular health going forward. Paleo diets, look, if it works for you, great. I don't think we need to rewrite our history to support the latest diet fad. But if a ketogenic diet works for you, fantastic, go for it. I'm not trying to change anybody's diet. But I think we can understand more broadly what is normal for humans and what can be healthy for humans, and take a broader view of what's out there. And just lastly, I would say is we have a lot to learn from hunting and gathering and farming populations still. So hopefully this research is the kind of thing that will be supported, we can do more of, and I can come back in 10 years and tell you more exciting stuff that you didn't know already. The next time that Dr. Chilton has this precision wellness seminar. So thanks for your attention. I'm looking forward to the wine and cheese and the questions later, and I want to make sure we thank these people. Thank you.
Wait just a second. So what I think we'll do is I think we'll have about 10 minutes of questions now. We're going to have a wonderful panel in a few minutes. We'll take about 10 minutes of questions. We'll then do about 15 minutes of wine and cheese, and then we'll come back with the panel. We'll probably close up between 7:30 and 8. So that's kind of the plan. Do we have questions of Dr. Pontzer? Yes, ma'am.
You would hang on for the mic.
Getting either diet or exercise determines that and about the 100 calories. What is?
Well, no, I don't think it's a either. I think it's both.
Basically,
Yeah.
exercise. And reverse that?
Yeah, I think, two things. One is, I'm not saying there is a high carbohydrate diet either. That's the point is a lot of diets can work. The way that you know if your diet's working is when it's 7 months in. Right? That's the only good way you have with the tools in your house to know if your calories in and calories out are in balance. And so you gotta listen to that. And if the scale is getting somewhere you don't like, then you're eating more than you're burning. And even if it doesn't feel that way, that's the way the physics works. It has to be true. So we need to think about our diets that way. Yes.
So if gluttony is the problem, it seems like calorie reduction alone doesn't help because your body can adjust it. Do you have any other thoughts?
So I think when we reduce how many calories, especially when we do it severely, our bodies will reduce our energy. If we do it in a way where we're not setting up our starvation response, where we don't feel hungry, our bodies don't freak out, we feel full, then we're going to be okay. And so there are ways you can do that. To just how to do that. You can take out the processed foods that are literally engineered to be in every form, like the whole. What's the chip brand you can never have in one? Right? What's a brand? You know, that's not a smile. That's a look at. Once you pop, you can stop. You know, that's not a good thing. If you eat, you might find that you feel full on your calories with a more high-fat diet. That makes you feel really full really fast. That works. A high-fiber diet, a bulky diet can work. Eliminating some foods you know you have a hard time resisting. Not having it in your house can be really good. But it's basically, first of all, once you've gotten to a healthy weight, it is very hard to gain weight. That's the reality. I don't have that goal for. I don't think anybody has. But it also seems to be the case that you're not trying to trick your guts or your fat cells, you're trying to trick your brain to reduce the calorie intake in a way that doesn't make you out. So if you're feeling hungry all the time, try to switch up the diet so you don't, without overeating. That's the best I can do. I work with 100 calories, I'm not a musician. Yes.
I would like to ask, with the 100 calories, how much arthritis do they have? Because of injury and just life.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a hard question to ask because we can't roll a CT scan or an MRI. I can tell you that, and Dave can tell you this better than I can, because I bring data and counting savings here as well as I work on aging in this population. Ask them. But they're fit and moving well and moving, walking, fast, even in their old age. So if they have arthritis, they don't seem to be bothered by it. And there's actually a really interesting study that was done a couple years ago looking at archaeological samples, from museums of people who had similar lifestyles to the it wasn't 100, similar lifestyle. And they had almost no arthritis present, even older adults in these pre-industrial populations. It seems like arthritis might be one of these things that comes out with inflammation and cardiometabolic disease. We think of it as wear and tear.
Or injury.
Or injury. So that's right. You have injuries, and they can be debilitating. We haven't seen much of that actually. It seems to feel okay. I don't know. We don't have great data on that. But as far as we can tell, people, again, 60, 70 days, are doing remarkably well, just keep it up, walking far, fast every day. Get a microphone. Yeah.
How would you, given what you just discovered here, how would you interpret the craze with contemporary fasting?
Intermittent fasting. Intermittent fasting. Again, I think, the reason that you see the health benefits you see with that, which is often weight loss, better cholesterol levels, better fast glucose levels, I don't think it's magic. I think it's because you haven't eaten as many calories, and your body is adjusting to fewer calories. That's probably a good thing in a lot of cases. So, the hot don't fast, as far as we can tell. Not intentionally. Not unintentionally. They can always go out and get tubers.
Does it keep the body responding?
I don't know the science on fasting very well, so I won't answer that definitively. I would say that I think the health benefit of fasting, to the extent there is any, is just calorie reduction. I don't think it's so much more than that. But I'm educated, please. That's not my expertise. Yes.
When you got exercise as being important for maintaining weight loss, and that it won't necessarily cause you to lose weight, and this gentleman is asking about, well, if you reduce your calories, then your body's going to adapt to that. So would it be wise and change the eating and the fasting? This is all like a game of balance. And if you could get exercise and use that in addition to diet, and make it look crazy so it doesn't get adjusted. So you use the exercise, you do your workouts, and then you cut back on that. And then maybe reduce the food at that time. And play with that to find your balance.
Yeah.
Would that be something that would be beneficial?
That smells like something that BIO5 should fund. I'm being totally serious. You don't know. So nobody's done that experiment as far as I can tell, where you flip-flop diet and exercise regimes so you find out where it goes. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know that. I don't know that's ever done, but that's possible.
I think we're going to take one more, but please remember, we're going to come back and have a whole discussion about this after
We want to know more about the specifics about this.
So it seems to me that
the biggest difference I can see with them and us is that they're not eating the refined foods that we are. Yes, they're getting the sweet with honey, but that's a monosaccharide compared to a disaccharide, which is table sugar.
There's sucrose in honey as well.
Pardon?
There's sucrose in honey as well.
No, but it's a monosaccharide. It goes through the gut much easier than a disaccharide. It has to be broken down, and that goes through the barrier of the gut and gets into the bloodstream, and that's what causes inflammation.
Well, there's as much glucose in honey, which is a monosaccharide, as much glucose in honey as there is in high fructose corn syrup.
But it's a different formation, isn't it? Yeah, I think so. And the other thing I was going to ask about is, do they have alcoholic beverages?
Not too often. And so it depends on sort of where you are in, there's camps all over that area. Camps that are closer to town tend to drink more. The camps we work with tend to be farther away from town because we want to get to more hunting and gathering only. And so we don't see alcohol beverages in those camps. So sometimes there are hot liquid drinking and it kind of infiltrates a bit, but not much. Yep.
Okay, we'll see you at 6:40. You've got 15 minutes to get out here and get back to your seats. Don't miss the second one. Thank you. Who's next to me? Bingo. Okay.
We start to make our way back to the tables. We'd like to.
How do we know when they're on?
Discussion.
It's on now. All right, it's just gonna stay on.
Yep, it's green there.
It'll just stay on.
Yep.
How do we change the slide?
How do we what?
Change the slide.
Oh, slides. Multiple slide problem. You have one slide?
With reactions. Oh yeah, thank you.
Oh,
Sir, I think we're gonna start with this slide.
no, I'm going last.
No.
That's,
Scott's slide. Scott? I'm first, yeah. Okay.
I thought you Absolutely, I'm misinformed.
I
Yeah.
need to get water.
Absolutely.
Pretty well sure.
You can have
You can have it? You sure?
it. Yes. By certain
Are you
choking
prepared for any questions?
up. Yes, I am.
My only goal here is to deflect questions for you too.
I was actually looking at where that was right because I was like, it's not right. It's just that I didn't know what it was. So yes, honey is a mixture.
Who's that? That's you. That must be your guy.
Half is glucose, half is sugar.
No, you're saying she was wrong. Right.
I was talking today with a woman. It's like, what is the thing about the trifecta problem, diabetes, celiac disease, and all of it? Well, like first of all, it's not independent. All those independently are. Okay, it's like there's a what? Yeah, I did. They're on there. I did it.
Thank you.
I thought Jan was going.
No, Jan's after you.
No, I'm last.
I'm in the middle. Oh, he's in the middle. All right.
I'm glad we organized.
I don't know what to do. Look, you didn't even get registered. I got a real one. Okay, good deal. We can just advance them from ourselves, right? Yeah, this right here. Oh, it's working. All right. So, how do you
Forward, backwards, and that's the
pointer. I'm gonna screw
the
that
push
up
the
for
button
sure.
is the
Forward. Okay.
yeah.
Great talk. Yep.
All right, folks. We're going to get started on the panel discussion. So, the panel discussion. Researchers today talking more about some of the issues, thinking about new collaboration. It's wonderful that there's so many people from the general community here. The community is all part of it. Well, getting the conversation going, researchers is really the goal. So, as part of tonight's presentation, we've got three fantastic from today. We're going to highlight some of the work that's going on here, how it intersects some of the things that Herman talked about, and some things we didn't. And then we'll go through each of those, a little bit about the data we on here. And then we'll open the floor to discussion and questions. So they have some questions for Herman, you all have questions for Herman as well, and for the panelists. Just kind of have a good discussion. So we're going to start off with Dr. Scott Bowen, who is a professor in the science.
All right.
Hey, David. It's nice to see everyone here this evening. Feel free to get up, get another glass of wine, but if you do, bring one by the stage on the way back to your table. David said, I'm a nutritional scientist, and I'm actually an exercise guy. I think my role in the family has my background, exercise physiology. I know you don't look at it, but I'm an exercise. My dad was an exercise weightlifting bodybuilder. I had a 10-year career. Believe it or not, in bodybuilding. I was the before picture. Anyway, I'm going to just make a shout out to Precision Medicine. You probably know. Some of the folks out front, we are a Precision Medicine campus, and all of us as the project is going on. It's a huge national study, and really people who saw across the country are going to be engaged in these projects. Well, go ahead and get involved. precision medicine is really all targeted therapy. And Herman was talking about variability, individual variability, and how does that influence the technical and understanding that we have about your health risk and how you respond to it. So that's really what precision medicine is about. And a lot of it is, targeted drug therapy. But it's, boy, get it right. There's more than that. And this is what I try to present my bias. Exercise is the real polypill. Polypill is a formulation of 2 or 3 drugs and target factors that overall decrease your risk of heart disease. And exercise, in my bias, because I said I'm an exercise guy, is something that does that. It targets multiple risk factors. It helps improve your health in multiple areas. And really understanding what that's all about is a part of precision medicine or precision health, or in this case, precision wellness. And I think that's at least part of the way the Herman's talk is in here tonight. The skeletal muscle manufactures the exercise, at least part of the exercise polypill. And understanding that is what it is that we're trying to do. We have 2 more slides. Otherwise, I've got to close those. But you just look at the 2 circles here. This is one study that was done here at the U of A. It's a very rigorous exercise study looking at bone outcomes. How can we improve bone health and reduce the risk of osteoporosis and fractures later in life? We did a long-term 13-year project around that issue. And the dots are people. Look at the widespread. If you just focused on the average, if you can see the straight line, the black line, that was the average effect. 1%, 2%. Doesn't seem like we did very much. That's probably not an effective intervention for health. But if you look at the spread, some individuals responded tremendously. 5% is huge in bone growth. 5%, 10%. Some people really benefited. And notice some other people actually went in the other direction. In this case, they were on diet, they were on calcium, they were exercising. These are women, they were on hormone replacement. Did everything we would recommend for bone. And still, there was quite a different response. Understanding that individual response is really what precision medicine, precision exercise, or precision diet, or whatever it's really all about. Here's one more study. This was actually a weight loss project in postmenopausal women, middle-aged women. And again, just see the wide distribution. We were doing dietary intervention, we were doing exercise intervention, we were doing behavioral strategies. Look at the widespread. So, one size does not fit all. Understanding how individuals are different, how they respond is really one of the long-term goals that we're working on. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
One of the things I just want to add to this, and it's something that brings this back to some of the concepts that Herman talked about in terms of an evolutionary perspective. When we think about how selection works on the human body, selection works on population variation, right? It works on individual variation within the population. So this variation that you see is not bad. It's not the variation in response to exercise is not necessarily bad. It is part of our evolutionary story. Populate individuals and populations have to vary. That's the way it works. So precision wellness is figuring out how to take advantage of that variation so that we can help individuals. So that's something to bring up for discussion. I want to bring up Jan Kuntidis next, who is a professor in the Department of Epidemiology and Biosciences about genetics.
Hello, everyone. So my PhD was actually in measuring policy. So I really love and appreciate the work that Herman and David have been doing. But I have since transitioned over to genetic epidemiology. And so this is kind of the way that I see the world. In terms of on the top there, we have genetic differences in illness. So even though we're 99.9% identical, that 0.1% does make all the difference in terms of variation we see across all of us. So genetic factors as well as lifestyle and environmental factors shown on the bottom affect health and disease. And not only that, but lifestyle or environmental factors can modify the effect of genetic factors. So what might, lifestyle that might be good for Natalie would be bad and not as good for Stephen because they have different genetic variants. Conversely, if it's the opposite way, you can also think about it the opposite way. But I think what's maybe underappreciated is that genetic variation, or the genetic differences among us, can also affect our lifestyle. So genetic differences can affect how well we sleep, how long we sleep, our immune function, how physically active we are. Do we love physical activity? Do we hate physical activity? Or do we have a sweet tooth? And those kinds of behaviors and lifestyles. So I've become really interested in that. And you know, that can be some way to eventually tailor lifestyles and medications to us.
Jan, and finally for the panel, Melody Pingo is going to come up. She's a professor in the Department of Nutritional Sciences, and she's going to be talking a little bit about diet and precision wellness.
Okay. I really appreciate that during Herman's talk he mentioned or emphasized it was a paleo fact, not fiction, that hunter-gatherer diets are not low-carb categorically, or maybe there's ebbs and flows, but not categorically. So thanks for making that point. That is, I'm a nutrition scientist, I'm a dietitian, a lot of questions about the best diet. And spoiler, there is no one diet to rule them all. You heard a little bit about that tonight already, but I just want to reassure everybody that you're all doing well. If you need some specific advice, we're hoping this idea of precision wellness is really going to manifest, to take hold and be a force in the next few years, maybe 5 years, maybe a decade, maybe sooner. But I want to offer 2 stories that came out in the last, I think, 4 months. One was last, recently, and one, this past 2 months in the New York Times. And if you don't have a subscription or can't access these, feel free to email me. I will send you the stories because I think they're well worth reading. And they're both about precision health. And the first story about genetic mutations, the more recent one, is very fascinating because it is about differences in appetite and differences in how people perceive hunger. And you might know people, maybe you're hearing this from people who could care less if they have lunch or not. It is not on their mind at all. And they don't feel hunger. They eat because it's time to eat. They need to eat. They would actually probably be amongst those who might take a pill even if it was available rather than food, right? So there are those folks out there. And then there are others of us who can't imagine skipping a meal or feel actually really awful if that happens. So this article is really fantastic. It speaks to that, and there is a genetic underpinning to that. There's a really great article about that. And the second study that I want to bring your attention to, the article is really terrific. It's called the AI Diet. It's by a cardiologist who works for Scripps, Eric Topol. And he is part of he actually was a participant in a study. And the study was collecting vast amounts of data. So imagine you're a participant, kind of like the All of Us study that Scott mentioned earlier, collecting everything you can imagine about you, including your behaviors, your all about the gut microbiome. They're doing fecal collection in this study to look at what is coming out of you as well as what is going into you. And looking at medications, looking at just everything, genetics, glucose, and putting all of those data together. So these are really big data sets about individuals. And then making a prediction about, from that, inferring what diet is best for you. And in his case, he's a cardiologist. He was horrified to find out that his best diet involved bratwurst and cheesecake. And that was when the computer algorithm told him, so they used artificial intelligence to do some of the predictions, machine learning. And he was just horrified. He was horrified about that. So he was saying, what's So there's data as an artifact, is this something that's, we need all the work in this area that we want, or there's just so much variability in community, and we're just seeing a chunk of it, and maybe some of my best diet is all about choosing proper switch, maybe some of those can help. So I just want to say that the variability and then the dispersion in weight that Scott was showing that graph, that happens across, I can think of almost every intervention study that I've been involved in, where you're looking at weight loss or cardiometabolic disease, risk management, and some people benefit, some people stay absolutely the same after the program, and some people actually get a little worse. So that just tells us right there why we need precision wellness and precision medicine to make a difference. So we're getting there, we're not almost there. And then finally, I want to speak to something that Herman and kind of ask a question again as well, maybe for the whole panel to start us off. But that metabolic adaptation, which is the thing. There's a fascinating article about The Biggest Loser. You've heard of this TV show, where people are with their paces and lose a lot of weight, like 100 pounds, more than 100 pounds. They did a follow-up study with 14 people who participated in that show. And folks, after 6 years, most of them, I think all of them regained weight. Average weight regained was 86 pounds, which is a lot, right? So most of it regained. But what they found that was particularly interesting and kind of mind-boggling in a way was that the resting metabolic rate was much, much lower than what was predicted. So not only did these folks struggle to keep the weight off that they had lost, but they had to work extra hard because their resting metabolic rate had changed, had adapted. So that is a fascinating finding. And it speaks to the difficulty that everybody faces with weight management and flexibility, why we need this precision approach. So thanks very much.
All right. So as you can see, we have a panel of experts from UA who kind of run the gamut of the kinds of research that can tell us something about how lifestyle impacts wellness and health. So the rest of tonight is about you all having a conversation and asking questions and having a panel converse with each other. And I actually think Colin's comment may make a great way to start it. Maybe Herman wants to speak a little bit about how that kind of extreme weight loss might affect energy.
Sure. The Biggest Loser case, there are other more academic studies of weight loss, but none as, I think, amazing as that one. I mean, people lost on average, I was just looking at these data, they lost on average 127 pounds. So, when you lose weight, it's because you breathe out those carbons, right? You break down the carbon in your body, you breathe it out. So they exhale the human. 127 pounds. That's amazing. And the follow-up, and they showed, really in the aftermath of The Biggest Loser, what you're talking about, the big changes in metabolic rate, crashed. But here's what's interesting. In the follow-up study of 6 years, the people who had gained, there's some people had, that's right, most people had gained weight back. Some people had gained all of it back. Some people had kept some of it off. The people who had gained almost all of it back, do you think they had high metabolic rates or low metabolic rates? They had, you talk about it so much. The people who gained it all back had higher metabolic rates. And here's why. The metabolic rates weren't protective against weight gain. The metabolic rates, when they finally gain all the way back, the body goes, things are okay. And the metabolic rate comes back, and the leptin levels come back, and the thyroid levels come back. So I think, and people who maintain weight loss for a long time, and I'd like to hear people talk about this, expertise I don't have, but those metabolic rates, those changes, leptin level changes, thyroid, those stay. You live with those the rest of your life. And to me, that points to two things. One is, how can we help people who are going to have to live with maybe feeling hungry a lot if they're really going to change lifestyle first? And secondly, how do we keep it so that kids don't have these problems in the first place? Because all the data show once you're at an unhealthy place, it's very hard to change from that. And others, people that were asking questions about diet and exercise after my talk, and I didn't mean to be flippant about my response. I don't think there are great answers right now because of how hard it is to change. And so the answer then is, don't get to that unhealthy place in the first place. Would be the best, as a society, that might be the best thing we could do. and how do we go about changing children, children's environment so that can be an achieved goal. So I guess I'm outside my expertise now. I'll turn it back over, but those ideas about how long adaptation lasts and how you might try to protect kids especially would be, maybe we can talk about some of that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Well, maybe if we, one thought, and just to build on that is, and this is for the panelists, we sort of talked about this when we were chatting last week, is at what point do some of these features, like your response to diet or your response to exercise, are they set by your early life experiences in some way? Does your metabolism get set in some way? I mean, Herman showed quite a range of variation on that total energy experience plot. Is some of that your early life experience that then you live with for the rest of your life? You sort of even, or your mother's experience.
We have a project that's going on right now that is addressing some of that, because the participants are women who have gestational diabetes, and their children, who are now 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old, but when they were in the womb, mom had gestational diabetes, and that has placed them at kind of triple risk. And Jan can speak to more the degree to which that is genetically determined, but certainly there's environmental exposures going on when kids are in the womb. They call it fetal programming, is going on in response to the high glucose. And then they're born into an environment in which there are environmental risk factors, maybe the types of foods that are being offered, maybe just opportunities to be physically active, all sorts of things influence how that unfolds. And so what we're doing is working with entire families to reduce the risk factors as much as possible. But certainly there's this underlying susceptibility that makes it really, really hard, I think, to do that. And it's a huge issue, because I think a lot of my physician colleagues would say, well, yeah, what you said, don't get that way to begin with. But that's easier said than done.
Oh,
that
of
is
course, yeah.
the most challenging health problem we have probably in the US. Yeah.
I absolutely think the early life experiences are critical. And certainly genetics play a role, but I absolutely think that the environment has a big impact, and we can do things to improve the situation. We have a way of engineering physical activity. That's what I know the most about. We have a way of engineering physical activity. Follow around your grandkids someday, it's exhausting. Give me a break. I have a almost 2-year-old grandson, but watch them. They're a perpetual motion machine. We engineer that out in some ways. I spent a couple of years on a panel, Institute of Medicine panel, studying physical activity basically in the school setting. And, there are ways to design classrooms where kids learn a lot, and just as much as our traditional classroom, but also providing lots of opportunity to be physically active or do other things. We just don't do that yet. But there are a few schools, there have been a few studies in which they intentionally designed a classroom so kids are learning, but they're constantly active. And we could do it. I just don't think we have gotten to that, where there's a will, there's a way. We're not quite there yet.
Just to put some numbers on the nature versus nurture question, the heritability of something like BMI, so the extent to which genetic factors explain why some people are obese and why some people are skinny. So genetic factors explain about 65% of that variation. So genetic factors do explain a sizable proportion, and we're stuck with these genetic factors throughout our life, from early life to late life. And so they do explain a sizable proportion of our susceptibility. And actually a lot of the genes that we've been finding for BMI seem to be expressed in the brain. So it seems like our genetic susceptibility to obesity is acting through things in the brain, maybe satiety or hunger and things like that. And similar for physical activity. Physical activity is also quite heritable. So the extent to which you're physically active is about 50% heritable, 50% due to genetic factors.
Okay, let's open up the floor.
Okay, I have a question. Yes, we're predisposed by our genetics. What about epigenetics or the art of turning on and off our genes deliberately?
Well, the way that I like to think about epigenetics is that it's kind of the first layer in the gap between our DNA sequence and our eventual trait or disease. And so I think there's a lot of maybe hype or hope that epigenetic markers are transmitted transgenerationally from mother to offspring, for example. But it seems like the evidence is not strong at all for that in humans, that the extent to which these epigenetic factors are passed along across generations is questionable at best, at this point.
Two questions. One is, I get the impression that you're saying the body has a similar preference for the higher BMI as opposed to the lower. Most people have an experience of being less heavy earlier and heavier later, and so why is the set point for a higher weight rather than the lower? That's my first question. And the second one is tossed out there is I've read a lot that says physical activity that we do is somewhat undone by hours of being sedentary.
Well, I can answer the first one from an evolutionary point of view. You know, we're all the latest versions of evolutionary lineages that have been unfolding for about 500 million years. And for all that time, it's been a really bad sign if you're losing weight, right? Being bigger is almost always better. And even more, closer to home, within humans, reproduction is so expensive that having a little more body fat on board is almost always a good thing to survive the next lean period or whatever. So it makes sense that our bodies tend to creep up rather than creep down. That's an evolutionary feature and not a bug. And for the inactivity issue about how sedentary things affect you, Dave Reichland is actually wrapping up a study that we did with the Hadza and other populations too that speak to that. So,
yeah, well, I'll say this. Sedentary behavior has been sort of a really hot topic, and cities that do smoking has been this sort of thing that people have talked about. One of the things that we found in Hadza, we use accelerometers to measure how much they sit, and they sit an incredible amount. So they sit like 9 or 10 hours a day, which is pretty much what we do when we're going to the office and watching TV and all that. But what is different about them is how active they are in one sense. So there's a paper that just came out yesterday that showed that if you're on really high end of physical activity, it does take away quite a bit of the mortality risk associated with lots of sitting. So being really physically active can mitigate some of those factors. Maybe not all the way, that's still sort of up in the air, but certainly being highly physically active can mitigate some of the negative effects.
We'll let Herman and David also respond, but I think the evidence is emerging that physical inactivity and physical activity are two different things. I mean, we used to think of it as you're either active or you're not active, but activity has benefits, physical inactivity runs a risk. One helps to ameliorate the other, but they're in some ways two separate entities that impact then on your health risk. The other thing I was going to say, just back to it sounded like you were talking about set point. We have this idea that we defend a set point, and then how can we gain weight? But it's not we defend it. We may not defend it as rigorously as you think, and it doesn't mean that we can't, through various lifestyle adaptations, change that set point throughout our life, and that helps to explain, the notion that we do gain weight, and there is an advantage to it. And the thing that Herman mentioned during his talk that struck me is we're starting to think about this, notion of energy balance in a different way. Energy in, energy out. Well, it's not quite that simple. It's much more complex than that. And it may have to do with more energy flux, for example. How much energy flows through the system, not necessarily whether it's out of balance, so to speak.
So stealing a question from a student who was too shy to ask it.
That's where I get all mine.
One of the complements of increased physical activity is the increased need for sleep. And I wonder if you could comment on how much Pontzer are sleeping compared to a modern diet, and then maybe just a broader discussion of that aspect of a third of our lifestyle.
Yeah, that's an easy answer for the Hodge. They sleep as much as we do. We measured it. And, you know, that's one of the things, when we first published the data on low energy, well, what seems to be low energy expenditures, we expect them to be high, it's the same as ours, so in some ways they're sort of lower than expected. We had a sleep researcher from UCLA, Jerry Siegel, reach out and say, maybe they're sleeping a lot. And, you know, we don't know, so sure, let's measure it. We measured it, and they sleep, you know, 7 hours a night, same as the typical American does. Also, by the way, for your sleep interested people out there, they don't have this sort of bimodal sleep that's been suggested as the normal human pattern where you wake up for an hour in the middle of the night. They don't do that. Some people might, but they don't. So I forget what the second part of the question was, but they sleep the same amount as we do.
Just generally whether people have thoughts of the role of sleep in our lifestyle.
I mean, sleep is a huge predictor, and you had a sleeping emoji on your thing, so I'm sure he knows a lot about it. We know it's a big predictor of health and health risks.
Yeah, I mean, what I've I guess learned secondhand from other researchers is that, and maybe you can respond to this, is that hunter-gatherers actually sleep kind of less than we do, like or 6 to 7 hours, and that is quite fragmented. I'm forgetting the name of the researcher.
Samson, or Siegel, or Yanish. There's only 3 people who have done this work.
No, someone else. Yeah, so
anyway,
I don't know.
I think you need some sleep.
Probably do.
Well, I mean, I'll say this, you know, they're not sleeping on nice squishy beds, they're sleeping on some blankets on the ground. And, you know, I don't know how many of you have co-slept with children. I've got 2 little kids. People talk about co-sleeping like it's this beautiful, wonderful thing, and it is, but, you know, you also get kicked in the face. So you know, light kind of comes on, and you know, the sun starts to come up on the savannah, and everybody's waking up in a Hadza camp, and they look as bleary-eyed and unenthusiastic as a human universal, you know. Anyway, so it isn't like they wake up, get out of bed, woo, where did I go? It's the same as you and me.
I'm going to ask an earlier question. So when you change the efficiency and the energy stays the same, do you understand what is the molecular mechanism that underpins that? Because obviously something very fundamental is changing. Again, we talked about mitochondria today.
Yeah.
We talked about, but there is some molecular change that is becoming much more efficient as you are extending all of this energy, but not really.
Anybody else want to take that one?
This is where we defer to the speaker.
No. Oh, right. Where is it? So you're absolutely right, but that's, you know, we need to get the mechanism. And, you know, as comfortable as I am with these data, unless we can find a good mechanism, then what the hell's going on, right? It has to be there somewhere. And all I can tell you is that's one of the next things we want to do. There's a lot of candidates out there. So people say more, you know, I'll tell you this story as a way of explaining what I'm talking about. When we came out with this, we found these data and did these initial analyses showing that they had the same expenditure as everybody else. I showed the data to a guy named Bill Wong, who's at Baylor Medical School and is a world-renowned expert on energy metabolism, been doing it since the 80s. And I said, Bill, I have these results that you have to help me understand because the Hadza have the same energy expenditures as everybody else, even though the Hadza are way more active. And he said, well, that makes sense, they're more efficient. And I said, thank God you understand this. What does that mean? He goes, they burn the same number of calories as everybody else, even though they're a lot more active. Yeah. And that's what that doesn't explain. And so, all I can say is there's a few possibilities. One is they're changing their behavior in such subtle ways that we can't tell. I don't think so. We've not met, I think we can finally know that that's not the answer. Second possibility is that their organs are actually using less energy. That's some of the data I suggested today, that you're shutting different systems down. The third possibility is that the mitochondria, which is for those who forgot my high school biology, the mitochondria is a little part of your cell that takes fuel in and turns it into this stuff called ATP, which is what your body uses for energy. And when your body does that, when your mitochondria does that, it takes carbon in, turns it into ATP. Or it can take the carbon in and kind of waste it in this leaky, basically it can leak protons. And so you can imagine that you spend the same number of calories, because it depends on how much carbon you bring into the mitochondria, not whether you have to not whether you make ATP or not, in terms of how many calories you burn. And so you could leak less if you were a Hadza, and that's, you could save energy that way. And all those are possible. If you ask, I've been going to conferences now and talking to different experts on these ideas the last few years. The person, you can guess somebody's specialty by what they tell you the answer probably is, right? If they're a mitochondrial expert, it's a second. So we don't know, and if I can't produce a mechanism, then I'm wrong. It's got to be there somewhere, but I don't know yet where.
I don't know the answer either, but it's a really good question, and it's such a good question that, like precision medicine and all of us study, there is actually a national study going on right now to try to answer questions like that. It's called MotorPack. And if you do research, you can't do a good study unless you've got a really cool acronym for the study. And we spend days just, what are we going to call this study? But anyway, so MotorPack is the molecular transducers of physical activity. That's understanding the molecular basis for these changes we're trying to talk about today. So, and that's your tax money worth. Thank you. It's a $180 million project.
So write your congressman and tell them that they should be measuring cytokines and reproductive hormones, a lot of other things with a MotorPack subject, and then not.
Right.
Which makes me sad.
That's true.
Sounds like you need to do some more grant writing.
Why doesn't somebody just write a grant for me? Isn't that why I'm here?
Other questions?
Charlie. I'm sorry, he was not being a good panelist. I mean, he was talking to me out of turn, and I missed the first half of that question. Please say it.
Have any of the Hadza people abandoned their hunter-gatherer lifestyle and joined modern civilization? If so, has it resulted in obesity and diabetes among the
Yes, a few have that we know of. I mean, we don't know everybody in the population, so they could or wouldn't know. But there are a few cases who we know went to the city and got an education or whatever else. We don't know enough of those cases to be able to give you more than anecdotal evidence. But the short answer is no, they tend to be, I don't know, it's like Shawnee and the guy, forgetting the man's name, who used to be one of the district heads there. You don't see huge differences, is the short answer. But I don't know about diabetes and stuff. There's not a big enough population of the early study.
And the villages surrounding don't have a lot of major obesity and diabetes problems.
That's right. It isn't like they walk out to the mall. That's not on the cards for these guys.
I was interested in your findings that are comparing primates in captivity versus wild. Really interesting that they are using the same amount of energy. In those cases, we do see diabetes in zoo primates. And we do see big amount of energy for dying of heart disease.
So two things about that. I work with Steve Ross in Lincoln Park Zoo, who's head of a chimpanzee and gorilla group there, and Steve's very involved in captive ape welfare. Diabetes is not unheard of, but it's actually not as common as we find in sedentary human samples. So it's happens, but it's rare, much rarer than it is among humans, as far as we can tell. And the heart disease that they get is not the same as the heart disease that we get. So it's true that what kills what we are most likely to die from as an ape in a zoo is a very specific kind of ape heart disease, which is there's a myopathy we don't see in humans, and we don't see our human kind of heart disease in them. So I take your point completely, and I think that there's a lot to be learned from those kinds of comparative studies, but I think we have to be, it's not going to be simple, that's the problem. But not to dispute your point about the importance of the comparative stuff, but it's not quite that clear to me.
Anatomy and physiology at different times. And I just want to know that your reaction that you mentioned the mother has diabetes. But I like to tell my students that kind of like too late for them with their babies because they're born with all of their eggs, with their ovaries. So the genetics for their children are set, except for perhaps epigenetics, implicit. So I think there's more of a grandmother thing. When my teenage daughter or teenage students to tell them when you get pregnant, you're affecting your grandchildren's genetics because the eggs will be formed during that time, during gestation. So is that correct? Confirmation, advice for a teacher?
I'll try to answer that. I think you do make a good point. I mean, and I'm far from an expert in that area, but women do form their egg cells during the fetal period. I think at 3 months of age, of fetal age. So certainly a lot of the fetal exposures a lot of the exposures that the mother is having are going to affect the epigenetic profile of those eggs. Not 100% sure about this. So I think that is the right message in general.
Well, I would say that genes, I mean, maybe you guys can argue with me here. Genes are not destiny, though. So definitely make that clear. And there's a researcher, George Bray, right, the famous quote, that his analogy was that genes, load the gun, but environment pulls the trigger for obesity risk. And so there's maybe not that particular analogy, but the idea is that there are ways to mitigate risk. Maybe you can't change everything, and certainly can't change your genes, but you can influence your environment quite a bit. So there's still a lot of room for. And at any time in the life cycle is a good time to prevent diabetes or prevent obesity. So you could be a fetus, you could be a very much older person, and it still all impacts your health. So I would say it's a universal prevention message.
Because very active in surgery, diabetes, my daughter. And for the I suspected that also is wrong with lifestyle, not losing much weight. He said it's basically the surgery. We need to 5 steps that verify that it's changed. Now, as you say, we talk to someone.
So, anybody in the very end is surgery expert? I know some of those studies. I'm not an expert in this area.
Yeah.
It seems to be one of the most effective approaches for long-term stable weight loss. And so, you know, it is not true, and I'll just say this because this is never true, that it gives you a blank slate, right? Because the experiences you've had since maybe even before you were born, you carry with you. And so I think that might be a nice analogy. I think to a hard-nosed biologist, it just goes too far. But it does really reset people's physiology just fundamentally. And that reset can be really effective for some people. And it seems to have, you know, it seems to have pretty good outcomes as far as I understand the research. Not an expert, not giving medical advice, but you know, that's what I understand.
So I thought you said for type 2 diabetes, is that what you said? I thought you mentioned type 2 diabetes. Yeah. I don't know the mechanism. Maybe someone else does. But it does seem to be, jump in, Herman, does seem to be true for a good number of people that and I'm not even sure, so I'm way out on a limb here. It's not my area. But, so I'm not quite sure what the particular surgical procedure is, but some form of bariatric surgery does seem to have a real impact on type 2 diabetes, and the change is quickly. The long term, I don't know about, but short term certainly seems to have an important effect for a lot of people. Why, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the different, again, this is as I read the literature, but the different dietary approaches or bariatric surgery approaches to cardiometabolic disease, they work to the extent that they change your weight. And so if you have weight loss as a ketogenic diet, you have great outcomes for that for type 2 diabetes, like glucose levels, all these things. If you have weight loss with a plant-based diet, you see a lot of the same health benefits from that. If you have weight loss with bariatric surgery, right? I don't know those numbers, but I believe that that's right. You get reductions in these risks. So, you know, I think the trick, maybe you know, as you leave tonight, one thing you can take with you, at least my perspective is, there is no magic. There's no magic here, right? If you can find a way to sustainably reduce your calorie input, and bariatric surgery is one way to do that, you're going to have good health you know, consequences from that. If you're in an unhealthy weight, the question is, how do you do that when your body is fighting against you, change its metabolic rate to adapt all these things? That's the question. Bariatric surgery, to the extent that it helps with those things, as I understand it, helps because it helps you cut weight.
Exactly.
Anybody else want to?
Yep.
If I may circle back to the Basal real quick, and perhaps Dr. Pontzer, you said this, not just missed it, but we talked about the energy expenditure, which I interpret as calories burned.
Yeah.
Is this sense pretty much awesome? But did we talk about what's their calorie intake?
Yeah.
And if I may tack on the second question to this, when I come home from the store, I have a super fancy Tiffany tracking smartwatch waiting for me from Amazon that I ordered for a lot of money. Is this a good investment, and what should I do?
I'm not going to answer that second question. So there are two questions. One is, I talked about energy expenditure, but what about energy intake with the Hadza? The second one is, what's the value of all these fitness trackers we have? You know, I've got a Garmin watch on myself. So, you know, so the answer to the first one is, because of the method we use to measure energy expenditures, these are actually the 10 or 11 day measurements. And we weigh people before and after, right? And so we know that they haven't changed their weight. That makes sense that people change their weight over the course of the week. And we know that their expenditures, once they're forming and matched by their intakes. So it's the same. Whether or not your activity is you know, worth tracking. Here's what I know. When I got my Garmin watch, I ran a lot more for a couple of weeks just because it was so fun to play with. And I still pay attention sometimes about how many steps I get and stuff. And you know, if you track people, including yourself, you change their behavior. So paying attention to what you eat, just pay attention rather than doing it mindlessly, is a great way to watch what you eat. Paying attention to your exercise is a great way to do more. And so, like I said, exercise isn't worthless. Exercise is very worthwhile. So I'm all for it. Get all the gadgets, have all the fun. If it gets you doing it, do it.
So we have time for one more question.
So I'm just wondering, in terms of translating all of this research from the Pontzer, from, each one of you has your research expertise, could you give one or two kind of takeaway tips that you would give to a population of people that want to increase their health, that want to have better health outcomes?
I'll start and then I'll just say, my punchline is sort of the punchline of my talk, which is that diet and exercise are two different tools that have two different jobs. And, I think we don't do a very good service to people when we talk about them kind of as the same thing. Like, you can run, if you run enough, you can eat your donut. How much you have to run to turn your donuts? I think that's not very useful. I think diet and exercise, two different tools, two different jobs. You can take that home. I'd add one more thing. Calories in, calories out. It's not magic, right? But it is sleight of hand. Right? Your body's very good at making things hard to track because your body's very adaptable. And so the best way you can track energy balance is your measuring scale. And believe that whatever you think you're eating, whatever you think you're expending, the truth is there. The really serious factor weight.
Yeah, I don't know if I would have any major insights other than diet and exercise, eat more fiber, social. But let's not forget the importance of social connections. I think social connections are really important for mental health and health in general. So get outside and be active and be with people.
I like the fiber message. I agree with you on that, actually. Now, there's a lot of evidence showing high fiber helps microbiome. We didn't talk anything about the microbiome tonight, which has an impact on weight and health and all those trillions of bacteria running around inside you. My advice, I'm going to reassure everybody here that you're all doing great. And there's no one diet, no one size fits all. I think that's really always my message. And I feel concerned when I hear people saying this is the only one right way to eat, because there is no one right way. So.
Well, I think you're going to put a little bit of that together. My advice would be don't eat a lot of fiber right before you run a marathon. It's just not a good plan. But trust me, don't ask me why I know that.
Good advice.
But my bias is around physical activity. Diet is important too, but I spent my career studying physical activity. I think it's really powerful for your health, and we could debate how much time you should spend in vigorous, moderate, whatever. Ultimately, find what you like to do that gets you up and moving around, and do it. And don't worry so much about whether it's intent. 30 years of research. That's all he's got to say. Find what you like to do and do it on a regular basis, and it has a powerful effect on your health. With people you like, but not on a high fiber diet.
Okay. My dad always, and I think it was because he was cheap, he always said, leave education a day early. And if you leave a day early, you'll always wish you stayed long. And you'll want to come back to the same vacation. So we're going to end tonight. It's been wonderful. May 3rd, Randy Neese, everyone come back. Again, another incredible speaker. We're incredibly fortunate to have. I'd like to thank David. I'd like to thank Herman. I'd like to thank the panel. Everybody, give everyone a hand and have a safe night.
I saw your name and I was like, 1 second.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's super.
Yep.